At 11:47 p.m., she sent a text that wasn't meant for him. She only needed $50 for baby formula. The number was one digit off. And at midnight, a millionaire knocked on her door. He didn't come alone. What happened next would unravel secrets neither of them were prepared for. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Her name was Sarah Collins, a 32-year-old single mother living in a quiet neighborhood outside Dayton, Ohio. 12 months earlier, she had been working full-time at a dental office, balancing long shifts with daycare pickups and late-night feedings. But when the clinic downsized after rising operational costs and a slowdown that echoed nationwide trends reported throughout 2023 and 2024, Sarah found herself unemployed, uninsured, and behind on rent within 3 months. According to data from Feeding America, millions of American families face food insecurity each year, and infant formula shortages and rising prices have placed additional strain on parents already stretched thin. By the time that December night arrived, Sarah's savings were gone, her credit cards were maxed out, and the only thing left in her kitchen cabinet was an empty metal can that rattled when she shook it. Her 8-month-old son, Mason, had cried himself into a restless sleep, unaware that his mother was counting the last $3 in her checking account while refreshing her banking app again and again as if the numbers might change. She had tried texting her former partner earlier that evening, a man who had promised support but slowly faded into silence after moving to another state for work. When he didn't answer, she scrolled through old messages and typed what she believed was his number, asking for a short-term loan, promising repayment by Friday. The message left her phone at 11:47 p.m. The reply did not come from the man she expected. It came from someone named Daniel Harper. Daniel Harper was 56 years old, a self-made investor whose career began in the late 1980s loading freight trucks before he attended night classes in business administration. Over the next 3 decades, he built a portfolio in logistics technology and commercial real estate, capitalizing on the e-commerce expansion that transformed American consumer behavior. Public records showed his company holdings had grown significantly during the pandemic era, when warehouse automation and distribution networks became essential infrastructure. Financial magazines occasionally mentioned him as a quiet but disciplined operator who preferred numbers to interviews and boardrooms to television studios. Divorced for nearly a decade, Daniel lived alone in a gated property 30 minutes from the city center. He had no surviving children. What few people knew, beyond close friends, was that he had lost his teenage daughter in a car accident 22 years earlier, an event that reshaped his private world and redirected much of his wealth toward low-profile charitable giving focused on children's hospitals and community clinics. On that particular night, Daniel had been reviewing end-of-year financial summaries when his phone vibrated with Sarah's message. He stared at the screen longer than most would have. He could have ignored it. He could have responded with a simple correction. Instead, he typed back 2 words, "Wrong number." Then he paused. The message on his screen was brief, unpolished, and desperate in a way that did not ask for sympathy, only for help. After nearly a minute, he deleted his reply and wrote something else. "What's your address?" Sarah felt a surge of fear when she read those words. She hesitated before responding, weighing risk against necessity, her eyes moving from her sleeping son to the dim porch light outside. She considered calling a neighbor. She considered blocking the number. But hunger compresses decision-making into narrow corridors. She sent her address. At 12:03 a.m., headlights swept across her front window. A black SUV idled at the curb. A man stepped out carrying a small paper bag. He introduced himself simply as Daniel and handed her $500 in cash along with 2 sealed containers of formula. He did not step inside. He did not ask questions beyond the baby's age. According to Sarah's later statement, he said, "Take care of him," and walked back to his vehicle. What complicates this account is what happened next. 10 minutes after Daniel left, another vehicle was captured on a neighbor's door camera, slowing near the same house before continuing down the street. Within 48 hours, Sarah shared her experience anonymously in a local parenting group online, describing how a stranger had appeared at midnight with help when she needed it most. The story spread quickly, amplified by regional news outlets eager for human interest narratives during the holiday cycle. Viewers identified Daniel through public property records and business filings. Headlines framed him as a mysterious benefactor. Yet the increased attention brought scrutiny. Why had a wealthy investor responded so quickly? How did he verify her situation? And who was in the second vehicle seen on camera? As online speculation intensified, financial journalists began revisiting Daniel's recent business dealings, noting that his firm had been navigating a high-stakes acquisition that placed him under regulatory review. Federal disclosures confirmed ongoing oversight related to antitrust concerns common in large-scale mergers. Some commentators wondered whether his late-night visit could be misinterpreted or exploited in a legal context. Meanwhile, digital analysts observed something else. 3 days before sending the text, Sarah had searched Daniel's name online after reading about one of his charitable donations to a pediatric unit in Columbus. Confronted with this information during a later interview, she admitted she recognized the surname when he replied, but insisted she believed the message would go unanswered. She described it as a long shot fueled by exhaustion rather than strategy. Daniel, when questioned, acknowledged he suspected she might know who he was once she confirmed the address. He chose to go anyway. In his words, recorded in a brief written statement, he said that the request did not ask for luxury, only for formula, and that sometimes judgment must be measured against need. Law enforcement determined there was no criminal intent from either party. The second vehicle, investigators concluded, belonged to a freelance photographer who had followed Daniel earlier that week while tracking a separate corporate story and happened to pass through the neighborhood by coincidence. No charges were filed. No further action was taken. The media cycle moved on. Sarah secured stable employment 6 months later at a regional medical supplier, aided by community donations that arrived after her identity became public. Daniel returned to his routines, declining interviews and reinforcing his preference for privacy. Yet the midnight exchange continues to circulate online, debated in comment sections and podcasts, as an example of chance intersecting with wealth, grief, and responsibility. Was it a mistake, an intentional risk, or a quiet act shaped by loss that never fully leaves? In a country where economic divides often feel immovable, one text message briefly connected 2 lives that otherwise would never have crossed. And perhaps the lasting question is not why he showed up, but how many similar messages remain unanswered each night, glowing on screens in houses separated by nothing more than a single digit. Who was the man that showed up at Sarah Collins' door at 12:03 in the morning, carrying $500 in cash and 2 cans of formula for a child he had never met? Why would Daniel Harper, a self-made millionaire with a guarded reputation and decades of disciplined business decisions behind him, respond to a random text message that was never meant for him? And why did neighbors on that quiet Dayton street report seeing more than one vehicle lingering near Sarah's house that night, long after Daniel's black SUV had pulled away? The screenshot of the message was simple and unpolished. "Hey, I hate to ask, can I borrow $50 for baby formula? I'll pay you back Friday." It was sent at 11:47 p.m. 1 digit off. One mistake. Or at least that's how it began. Within days, local online forums were dissecting every detail, from the timing of Daniel Harper's response to archived business headlines describing him as reclusive, methodical, and intensely private. Financial publications had covered his expansion into logistics technology and warehouse automation, particularly during the years when e-commerce reshaped the American economy. He was known for calculated risk, not emotional impulse. So what changed that night? Security camera footage from across the street captured his SUV idling under a flickering porch light. The timestamp confirmed the arrival at 12:03 a.m., but it also showed another set of headlights approaching minutes later, slowing near Sarah Collins' address before continuing down the block. No one stepped out. No one knocked. Yet the presence of that second vehicle became the detail that refused to fade. Accident or setup? Generosity or something else? What was Daniel Harper really looking for when he asked for her address instead of correcting the number and moving on? Online speculation accelerated when police cruisers were briefly spotted in the neighborhood 2 days later, responding to an unrelated call but photographed in front of the same row of houses. The image circulated with captions suggesting an investigation had begun. There was no official statement connecting law enforcement to Daniel Harper or Sarah Collins, but once a narrative forms, it rarely waits for confirmation. The more people examined the timeline, the more questions surfaced. Why did Daniel respond within minutes? How did he verify her story so quickly? And why did Sarah Collins search his name online 3 days before the text was sent? Was she aware of his philanthropy, his past donations to pediatric hospitals, his preference for quiet charity that rarely made front-page news? Or was this truly a desperate mistake made by a mother staring at an empty formula while her 8-month-old son Mason slept in the next room? Daniel Harper had built his life on precision. Colleagues described him as cautious, slow to trust, careful with public exposure. He avoided interviews and declined invitations to speak at investment conferences unless contractually required. When his name surfaced in connection with Sarah Collins' midnight text, reporters attempted to reach him for comment. He refused, issuing only a brief written statement confirming that he had responded to a request for help and that no further explanation would be given. That silence fueled more theories. Some believed he was hiding a larger motive. Others saw it as proof of authenticity, the mark of someone uninterested in publicity. Meanwhile, Sarah Collins found herself pulled into a conversation far bigger than the $50 she originally requested. Her social media accounts were analyzed. Her employment history was scrutinized. Strangers debated whether she had targeted Daniel Harper intentionally after reading about his charitable giving, which had been documented in public filings and local news reports over the years. The single digit that separated her intended recipient from Daniel Harper became symbolic, a fragile line between coincidence and intention. Neighbors who had never spoken to Sarah before were now describing the events too. Reporters, recounting how the black SUV had looked expensive, how the driver had moved with calm confidence, how the porch light flickered as if timed for drama. But drama does not prove motive. It only deepens curiosity. The more this story circulated, the more it seemed to resist simple explanation. A struggling mother, a wealthy investor, a midnight delivery, a second vehicle, a digital trail showing prior searches. Each piece on its own could be dismissed. Together, they demanded context. To understand what happened at midnight and why Daniel Harper stepped out of his vehicle instead of ignoring a message that wasn't meant for him, we have to go back. To understand why that single text message connected Sarah Collins and Daniel Harper, you have to understand who they were long before midnight placed them on the same street. Sarah Collins was 32 years old, raised in a working-class family outside Dayton, Ohio, the kind of place where neighbors mow their lawns on Saturdays and wave without asking too many questions. She graduated from community college with a dental assisting certificate and spent nearly a decade working in the same small practice. Patients requested her by name because she remembered birthdays and asked about grandkids. She wasn't reckless, and she wasn't looking for shortcuts. When the clinic reduced staff after revenue declined, she stayed hopeful longer than most, believing loyalty would count for something. It didn't. Within weeks, she was packing her tools into a cardboard box and driving home in silence, rehearsing how she would explain it to her 8-month-old son, Mason, as if he could understand. Pride shaped most of her decisions after that. She applied for jobs daily, cut expenses down to the basics, and avoided telling even close friends how tight things had become. The small rental house she lived in had aging carpet and a porch light that flickered when the wind picked up, but it was clean, and it was hers. She paid the bills herself. She kept receipts organized in a drawer. She tracked every dollar in a notebook. By December, the notebook had more red ink than black. The cost of formula had climbed steadily across the country, and like many parents during recent inflationary cycles documented by federal consumer data, Sarah felt each increase immediately. She rationed what she could, stretching cans longer than recommended, telling herself it was temporary. The night she sent that message, she had already texted Mason's father twice that week. His replies had grown shorter over the past year, then less frequent, then absent. He lived in another state, working construction jobs that kept him moving. At 10:58 p.m. that evening, she sent him a final message asking for help. No response. At 11:47 p.m., exhausted and staring at her phone, she typed his number from memory. But the number she typed wasn't his. It was one digit off. That single mistake rerouted her request to Daniel Harper. Daniel Harper was 56 years old and lived in a gated property 30 minutes away from downtown Dayton. He did not inherit wealth. He earned it the slow way. At 18, he worked double shifts in a factory that manufactured automotive parts, saving enough to enroll in night classes at a state university. Over decades, he moved from operations into management, then into ownership stakes, eventually founding a logistics software company that specialized in warehouse optimization. When online retail expanded nationwide, his systems became valuable. Investors noticed. Contracts multiplied. By his early 50s, Daniel Harper had accumulated substantial assets, diversified across technology and commercial real estate. Colleagues described him as disciplined and measured, a man who read every contract twice and rarely spoke without purpose. He was divorced, a separation finalized years earlier after what court records described as irreconcilable differences. He had no living children. Those close to him knew the absence in his home was not by choice. He kept photographs in a private study that few people entered. He donated to pediatric healthcare quietly, preferring wire transfers to ceremonies. He did not answer unknown numbers. Assistants filtered his calls. His email ran through layers of screening. Random messages rarely reached him, and when they did, they were usually deleted within seconds. So why did he respond to Sarah Collins that night? Why did he ask for her address instead of correcting the mistake and moving on? Earlier that same day, Daniel Harper had received personal news that unsettled him in a way quarterly earnings reports never could. It arrived in a sealed envelope delivered by courier, and after reading it, he canceled 2 meetings and remained alone in his office longer than usual. No one outside his inner circle knew what the envelope contained. What is certain is that by the time Sarah Collins' text appeared on his screen at 11:47 p.m., Daniel Harper was not in his usual frame of mind. And sometimes timing matters as much as intention. At 11:47 p.m., Sarah Collins pressed send on a message she believed was going to Mason's father. Hey, I hate to ask, but can I borrow $50? I'll pay you back Friday. It's for the baby. The words were simple, stripped of drama, written by someone who had already exhausted every other option. On the other side of town, Daniel Harper felt his phone vibrate against the glass surface of his desk. He glanced at the notification, expecting a routine alert from one of his portfolio managers. Instead, he read a message from an unfamiliar number. He stared at it longer than necessary. $50. For baby formula. He began typing a response. Wrong number. He paused, thumb hovering over send. Then he erased it. The cursor blinked in the empty text field while he considered something only he fully understood in that moment. Finally, he typed 4 different words. What's your address? The decision was uncharacteristic for a man known for caution. Daniel Harper did not involve himself in strangers' lives. He did not respond to random requests. Yet he waited for the reply. Across town, Sarah Collins felt her chest tighten when she saw his question. She reread the conversation 3 times, weighing risk against necessity. The house was small, the neighborhood quiet, the porch light unreliable. She could ignore him. She could block the number. But Mason would wake up hungry in a few hours. She sent her address. Daniel Harper stood from his desk almost immediately. He walked to the kitchen, opened a drawer where he kept emergency cash, and counted out $500. He put on his coat, drove to a 24-hour pharmacy and purchased 2 cans of formula, choosing the same brand listed in Sarah's earlier online parenting group post that he had quietly looked up after receiving her message. By 12:03 a.m., his black SUV turned onto Sarah Collins Street. The engine idled beneath the dim porch light as he stepped out, carrying a small paper bag. He did not rush. He did not scan the surroundings with suspicion. He simply walked to the door and knocked. Sarah opened it slightly, leaving the chain latched. She held Mason against her shoulder. Daniel Harper introduced himself by first name only. He handed her the bag, then the folded cash. There was no lecture, no request for repayment schedule, no prolonged conversation. He gave her his business card and said quietly, "Take care of the baby." His tone was steady, almost distant, as if he were completing a transaction rather than a rescue. Then he turned and walked back to his vehicle. Within seconds, the SUV disappeared down the street. For a brief moment, it seemed the exchange would remain nothing more than a private act between two strangers connected by a single mistyped digit. But 10 minutes later, a neighbor's security camera captured another vehicle entering the same block. The headlights slowed near Sarah Collins' house before continuing forward. The footage would later circulate online, raising questions no one had considered in the quiet seconds after Daniel Harper drove away. Who was in that second vehicle, and why did it arrive so soon after him? Was it coincidence, curiosity, or something else entirely? Sarah Collins did not notice the passing car. She was inside, setting the formula on her kitchen counter, her hands trembling from adrenaline and relief. Daniel Harper did not see it either, already merging onto the main road, his mind returning to the envelope he had opened earlier that day and the decision he had just made without consulting anyone. By morning, the story could have ended there. A stranger helped a struggling mother. A mistake led to generosity. But stories rarely stay contained once evidence exists. The time-stamped footage, the business card, the unusual amount of cash. Each detail added weight. And that's when things got complicated. By the following afternoon, what had felt like a private exchange between Sarah Collins and Daniel Harper began shifting into something neither of them controlled. Exhausted but relieved, Sarah posted in a local parenting forum under an anonymous username, "A stranger saved my baby tonight." She described the empty formula can, the mistaken text, the knock at 12:03 a.m., and the $500 left in her hand. She did not include Daniel Harper's full name at first. She only mentioned the business card and that the man who came to her door appeared successful, quiet, and serious. Within hours, other users began speculating. Someone zoomed in on the partial logo she had blurred in a photo. Another cross-referenced regional corporate filings. By evening, Daniel Harper's identity was circulating in comment threads. A small local blog ran the headline, "Millionaire Midnight Hero." Larger outlets followed, reframing the story as a feel-good holiday miracle. They referenced his business achievements, his reclusive personality, and his documented charitable donations to children's hospitals across Ohio. What they did not include was his reaction. Daniel Harper was furious. He had not gone to Sarah Collins' house for recognition. He had not asked for publicity. He had acted impulsively, something rare for him, and now his name was attached to a viral narrative that reduced a complicated moment to a headline. His phone filled with interview requests. Investors emailed asking whether he was aware of the attention. Board members expressed concern about reputational implications during an ongoing acquisition review. Daniel Harper released a brief written statement confirming that he had responded to a request for assistance and wished to maintain privacy. That request went largely ignored. The story had already taken on a life of its own. Then another development surfaced. Daniel Harper's ex-wife, Laura Harper, saw the address mentioned in a reposted thread. She recognized it immediately. Years earlier, during their marriage, she had volunteered at a community clinic 2 streets away from Sarah Collins' rental. The familiarity unsettled her enough to contact Daniel directly. Why that house? Why that neighborhood? Her call was brief but direct, and it marked the first time Daniel realized how exposed the situation had become. At the same time, online commentators began asking harder questions. Why had Daniel Harper brought $500 instead of the $50 requested? Why did he ask for Sarah Collins' address before verifying her identity? And why did a second vehicle appear on security footage 10 minutes after his departure? The image of those headlights, time-stamped and undeniable, circulated widely. Some claimed it was a reporter tracking him. Others suggested it could be linked to federal regulators reviewing his company's recent merger attempt. The speculation grew loud enough that a freelance investigative journalist named Mark Reynolds began examining the timeline more closely. Reynolds, who had previously covered corporate governance and executive misconduct, filed public records requests related to Daniel Harper's business dealings and any police activity in the neighborhood that night. He found no criminal filings, no warrants, no active investigation tied to the address. Still, he noted the coincidence of timing. Reynolds also uncovered what local news had mentioned only briefly. Daniel Harper had been donating quietly for years, often through intermediary foundations that concealed the source. Hospital administrators confirmed receiving anonymous contributions traced back to entities connected to him. None of those donations involved personal visits. None involved midnight drives across town. This was different. As Reynolds continued digging, another detail emerged from Daniel Harper's past. 20 years earlier, Daniel and Laura Harper had lost their only child, a 14-year-old daughter named Emily, in a car accident caused by a distracted driver. Court records confirmed the case. Friends recalled how Daniel withdrew from public life afterward, channeling energy into work while Laura focused on community outreach. The loss reshaped them both, ultimately contributing to their separation years later. When this information resurfaced in connection with Sarah Collins' story, the narrative shifted again. Suddenly, the midnight visit seemed less spontaneous and more personal. Had the text triggered a memory? Had the words, "for the baby," cut through Daniel Harper's usual defenses? He declined to answer those questions publicly. Privately, according to a source close to him, he admitted that reading the message had felt like being pulled backward in time. Meanwhile, Sarah Collins faced scrutiny of her own. Internet users pointed out that she had searched Daniel Harper's name days before sending the text. She acknowledged that she had read about his hospital donations in a local article, but maintained that the number she dialed belonged to Mason's father and that the connection to Daniel Harper was accidental. The distinction between intention and coincidence blurred as more voices weighed in. Mark Reynolds published a long-form piece outlining the verified facts, the timestamped text, the pharmacy purchase receipt obtained through a source, the security footage showing the second vehicle, and Daniel Harper's documented history of philanthropy. Reynolds stopped short of accusing anyone of wrongdoing, but he raised the question that now lingered everywhere. Was this an act of compassion born from personal grief, or a calculated move influenced by factors still unseen? Daniel Harper returned to work under heightened attention. Sarah Collins returned to job applications while managing interviews she never expected to give. And in the background, that second vehicle remained unexplained in any way that satisfied everyone. What began as a mistaken text had evolved into a story about wealth, loss, and the fragile line between generosity and suspicion, and it was far from over. As speculation intensified around Sarah Collins and Daniel Harper, the unanswered question about the second vehicle refused to disappear. The grainy security footage showed headlights slowing near Sarah Collins' rental 10 minutes after Daniel Harper's black SUV pulled away, then continuing down the block. Online commentators built entire theories around those few seconds of video. Some believed it was a reporter. Others suggested a jealous neighbor. But when investigative journalist Mark Reynolds submitted additional public records requests tied to Daniel Harper's business activities, a different explanation began to surface. Daniel Harper was, at that time, under federal scrutiny related to a proposed hostile corporate takeover involving a regional distribution software firm. According to filings with the Federal Trade Commission and reporting consistent with how regulators monitor high-value acquisitions, His company had been engaged in aggressive negotiations that raised antitrust concerns. While no charges had been filed and no criminal allegations were publicly confirmed, it was standard practice in certain high-stakes financial disputes for federal authorities to monitor communications and movements when market manipulation or insider coordination was suspected. Through confidential sources familiar with regulatory procedure, Reynolds learned that Daniel Harper's travel patterns had recently drawn attention. The second vehicle captured on that Dayton street did not belong to a reporter. It was associated with federal agents conducting discreet surveillance as part of a broader inquiry into Daniel Harper's corporate conduct. That night, when Daniel Harper drove unexpectedly to Sarah Collins' address after receiving a late-night text, the agents tracking him had no context. From their perspective, a powerful executive under review had made an unplanned stop at a residential property near midnight. They documented it. They recorded timestamps. They noted the address. What looked like a private act of generosity from one angle looked, from another, like a potential off-the-books meeting. The fact that Daniel Harper remained inside the house for only a brief moment did not immediately clarify matters. Surveillance protocol required observation, not interpretation. When this information began circulating among those close to the investigation, the narrative shifted again. Suddenly, the second vehicle was no longer mysterious in a vague sense. It was procedural. It was official. It was tied to a larger corporate battle playing out beyond Sarah Collins' awareness. Daniel Harper had not been followed because of her. He had been followed because of him. And that distinction changed everything. If agents were monitoring Daniel Harper's movements, then his decision to respond to Sarah Collins' message carried additional risk. Why would a man under scrutiny create a new, unexplained data point on his timeline? Why introduce uncertainty into an already sensitive regulatory environment? Some observers argued it proved authenticity, that no executive attempting to conceal wrongdoing would voluntarily detour to a stranger's home under surveillance. Others saw recklessness, suggesting emotional impulse had overridden professional caution. Within federal documentation reviewed later, the midnight visit was flagged for internal review, then cleared when agents determined no meeting had occurred beyond a brief doorstep exchange. But the clearance came days after the visit, not during it. In those early hours, when headlights slowed outside Sarah Collins' house, agents did not know she was a laid-off dental assistant with an empty formula can in her kitchen. They only knew Daniel Harper had deviated from routine. As this revelation emerged, public reaction divided sharply. What had once been framed as uncomplicated generosity now intersected with corporate power and government oversight. Headlines shifted tone from millionaire midnight hero to executive under review makes late-night visit. The context altered perception, and then another layer surfaced. When digital forensic analysts examined the metadata of Sarah Collins' phone records, they found something small but unsettling. 3 days before sending the message at 11:47 p.m., Sarah Collins had not only searched Daniel Harper's name. She had clicked on a local news article detailing his company's pending takeover and the regulatory attention surrounding it. The timestamp placed her reading about him less than 72 hours before the text was sent. She maintained that the number she typed belonged to Mason's father and that the similarity was coincidence. But to investigators already mapping timelines, the overlap felt significant. Was the text truly accidental, or had Sarah Collins, consciously or not, reached towards someone she believed might respond because he had publicly donated to children's causes before? Daniel Harper declined to speculate. He acknowledged knowing that once he saw her address and name, he realized she may have recognized him as well. He went anyway. The federal agents tracking him closed their internal note on the midnight visit after confirming no corporate representatives or third parties had been present inside the residence. Yet the existence of that surveillance record meant the event was no longer private. It was documented in more than one system. It existed simultaneously as an act of compassion, a viral headline, and a footnote in a federal review. And just as observers began forming conclusions, phone records revealed one more irregularity that complicated the timeline. A brief outgoing call from Sarah Collins' phone occurred 2 minutes before she sent the text at 11:47 p.m. The number dialed was deleted immediately afterward. Who she attempted to reach in that 2-minute window, and why the record was cleared so quickly, became the next question. As analysts continued reviewing Sarah Collins' phone records, the detail that had seemed minor at first began to demand closer attention. The number she texted at 11:47 p.m. was indeed 1 digit off from Mason's father's contact. But when investigators reconstructed her saved contacts from cloud backups, they discovered something subtle. The mistaken number did not simply resemble her ex's phone number. It matched a separate contact stored in her phone under a single initial, D. That contact had no last name attached, no profile photo, just the letter. When asked about it during a recorded interview, Sarah Collins explained that D referred to Mason's father, whose name also began with that letter. She claimed she had once saved his work number separately and forgotten to update it. Digital forensic specialists confirmed that contact entries had been edited multiple times over the past year, which made the origin difficult to trace with certainty. What they could confirm was that 3 days before the text message, Sarah Collins had searched Daniel Harper's full name online and read a local article detailing his anonymous donations to a pediatric hospital in Columbus. The timestamp of that search was precise. It occurred late at night, after Mason had been put to bed. When confronted with this during a formal interview, Sarah did not deny reading the article. She acknowledged recognizing Daniel Harper's name when he responded to her message. She insisted, however, that the initial text was meant for someone else and that the similarity of the number was accidental. The distinction between accident and intention narrowed to interpretation. Investigators posed the central question directly. Did she know who he was before she sent the message, or did she only realize it after he replied? Sarah Collins maintained that desperation guided her actions, not strategy. Yet she admitted something else under questioning. When Daniel Harper asked for her address, instead of dismissing the message, she suspected he might be the same man she had read about days earlier. And she did not correct him. She took the chance. It was not entirely random. It was, at least in part, calculated. She believed that if he was the Daniel Harper known for donating to children's causes, he might respond differently than Mason's father had. That calculation was born from financial stress and maternal urgency, not malice, but it was a decision nonetheless. The narrative that followed online framed her as either manipulative or resourceful, depending on perspective. What remained less publicized was Daniel Harper's response when investigators shared their findings with him. He did not appear surprised. In a private statement later summarized by a source familiar with the discussion, Daniel Harper acknowledged that he had considered the possibility that Sarah Collins recognized his name before providing her address. He also acknowledged that the thought crossed his mind before he got into his SUV. He went anyway. When asked why, given that he was under federal scrutiny and aware of the potential implications, Daniel Harper offered a single explanation that investigators documented verbatim. She asked for formula, not rent, not jewelry, just formula. He added that intent matters, but so does need, and in his judgment that night, the risk of being misunderstood was outweighed by the image of an empty kitchen cabinet and an 8-month-old child who had nothing to do with corporate disputes or digital speculation. The most personal detail emerged only at the end of that exchange. Daniel Harper referenced his daughter, Emily, who had died 20 years earlier. He told investigators that when he read Sarah Collins' message, he imagined a version of his own life in which someone else might have stepped in during a moment of vulnerability. Whether Sarah had typed the wrong digit by accident or by hope no longer seemed to define the outcome for him. He believed her, and in that belief, he made a decision that reshaped both their lives, placing a private act under public scrutiny and leaving behind a question that lingers long after headlines fade. When generosity intersects with strategy, does the origin matter more than the result, or is it the choice to show up that defines the story? In the end, the facts remain steady even as opinions shift. At 11:47 p.m., Sarah Collins sent a message asking for $50 for baby formula. At 12:03 a.m., Daniel Harper stood on her porch with $500 and two sealed cans. A second vehicle slowed on the same street because federal agents were tracking him, not her. Phone records showed she had read about his charitable giving days earlier. She admitted she took a chance once she recognized his name. Daniel Harper admitted he suspected that possibility before he ever turned the key in his ignition. And still, he showed up. So what was it? Was it manipulation by a struggling mother who understood how influence works in a digital age? Was it compassion from a man whose private grief shaped how he responded to a simple request involving a child? Or was it coincidence amplified by timing, surveillance, and a viral headline that neither of them anticipated? In a country where financial gaps often feel immovable, where executives and single parents rarely occupy the same emotional space, one mistaken digit forced two realities to intersect. Wealth and desperation do not often meet face to face. When they do, assumptions rush in quickly. Some viewers see calculation. Others see mercy. Some argue that Sarah Collins crossed a line by allowing the interaction to continue once she realized who Daniel Harper was. Others argue that Daniel Harper, fully aware of his visibility and resources, exercised the freedom to act as he chose. What remains undeniable is that both of them made conscious decisions in those minutes between 11:47 p.m. and 12:03 a.m. The porch where they stood is quiet now. The flickering light still hums above the doorway. Mason is older. Sarah Collins is employed again, rebuilding stability piece by piece. Daniel Harper continues to manage his companies under regulatory oversight that eventually resolved without criminal charges. The federal file noting his late-night stop has long since been archived. But the question lingers beyond paperwork and headlines. When a request for help appears unexpectedly on your screen, filtered through risk and reputation and memory, what do you do with it? Do you correct the number and move on? Or do you ask for the address and accept whatever follows? The empty porch stands as a reminder that the most consequential decisions are often made in private, without witnesses, before anyone can label them right or wrong. And perhaps that is why this story endures. Because somewhere tonight, another message is being typed. Another digit may be entered incorrectly. And somewhere else, someone with the power to ignore it will decide whether to respond. Now the story belongs to you. Knowing everything we've uncovered about Sarah Collins and Daniel Harper, about the 11:47 p.m. text and the 12:03 a.m. knock, about the second vehicle that wasn't following her but tracking him, about the Google search 3 days earlier and the envelope Daniel Harper opened that same afternoon, what do you believe? Was Sarah Collins wrong for taking a chance once she recognized his name, even if the first digit truly was a mistake? Would you have answered that message if it appeared on your phone late at night, knowing you were already under scrutiny and that any unexpected move could be misinterpreted? And was Daniel Harper's decision generous, reckless, or something more complicated that sits between caution and compassion? Stories like this rarely fit into clean categories. They force us to measure intention against outcome and risk against need. If you think this story was unexpected, wait until you hear what happened when a delivery driver returned a billionaire's lost phone and uncovered something far bigger than a missing device. Subscribe for more real-life stories where one decision changes everything.